Development consultant Najim Animashaun, who joins us from the UK capital. Thank you for speaking with us on France 24.
Thank you, Francois.
Your reaction to the images of Theresa May standing alongside Muhammadu Buhari?
Well, I was unable to see them from here, but I've been following Mrs. May's Africa trip. And it's a welcome development that she's come to South Africa, Nigeria, and of course she's going to Kenya next.
A welcome development, and they're really, her delegation really talking up how that trade is only going to strengthen. They want to be the G7's biggest investor in Africa. Talking about doubling trade with Nigeria by 2030. Do you see that happening?
Well, I do see it happening, but you have to look at where they're starting from. Right now, they're doing about $1 billion worth of trade with Nigeria as of 2017. And when you compare that with trade with Germany, which is over $3.5 billion, they've got some catching up to do, even though they do have an advantage in the historical and linguistic ties. With Nigeria. And they're also some 20 or so years behind the Chinese, who have been steadily investing in Nigeria, as well as historical ties with India. And not to mention France, of course, which with Total.
Well, why is Britain lagging? Later this week, there'll be Angela Merkel, who will be in Nigeria. She's been to Africa several times in the past couple of years.
Well, if you think about Angela Merkel, she's actually been doing quite a bit of economic diplomacy with Nigeria since she came into power in 2007 with the late President Yar'Adua, when the first trip that President Yar'Adua made then was to Heiligen Dam at the G7. I think it was a G8 at the time. Which spawned a series of agreements and partnerships with the German government and the German private sector. So what Theresa May is trying to do is basically catching up with what the Germans have actually been doing for quite a number of years now.
What do Nigerians make of Theresa May's pitch, though? Because we saw, for instance, that after the Brexit referendum, her government talking up the fact that, well, we don't just have to trade with Europe, we can trade with our Commonwealth partners. But countries like India coming in and saying, well, show us the visas. What's the conversation been like with Nigeria?
Well, it's rather, I think it's a different conversation that Theresa May is having with Nigeria than the conversation she's having with South Africa and the conversation she'll have with Kenya. Some of the things that she said that will please Nigerians from her speech is that she would be advocating for a Security Council seat for Africa in the United Nations. She's also advocated for increased aid to Nigeria, basically private sector-driven aid using the CDC, which is the Development Finance Institution, which I think is akin to Agence Française de Développement in Nigeria. So you can actually see some of the interventions that she's trying to jumpstart, particularly in the financial sector, might be able to pay off some dividends. However, I'm not sure whether those actually need a trade agreement to implement, because there are sufficient flows of capital not to really require it. And as I said, Total is the largest investor in the oil and gas sector, which is where Britain normally has its advantages with Shell. It's hard to see where the value added that British business is going to bring to Nigeria in the near term is going to be.
What do Nigerians make of Brexit?
I think they're as dumbfounded as everybody else is about Brexit. And I think this trip kind of proves, or demonstrates to Nigeria a sort of desperation on the part of Britain to reach out and forge a new path in a fairly haphazard way that they're not even sure really is in their best interests at this point in time. So I think a wait-and-see approach is definitely something that I see most Nigerians taking on the horizon. But I also think that trade is not really the main issue for Mrs. May in Nigeria. She did go to Abuja to see the president, but she's going to Lagos to discuss human trafficking and security. So I think that's a very important part of Mrs. May's agenda in Nigeria, in addition to drumming up business for the City of London in Lagos, which is the financial capital of Nigeria. But the focus, I think, will be more about security and about trafficking. Security and trafficking, and we saw that was the big issue when there was that EU-Africa summit that took place earlier in Ivory Coast. Najima Animashaun, just when you think about Theresa May going to Lagos after Emmanuel Macron, you just talked about Total supplanting Shell in Nigeria. What do Nigerians make of their relationship today with the former colonial power? Well, we have strong ties with the former colonial power. I'm sitting here in London overlooking the Houses of Parliament, so I'm not in Nigeria, so that gives you an indication of how strong these ties are. But Macron has a special place for us in Nigeria because he did actually spend time working in Nigeria, and he has a particular connection, a unique connection amongst French politicians with Nigeria, and has already been there and has discussed extensively partnerships with Nigeria. So in many ways, he has a comparative advantage, particularly where personalities matter in making deals in places like Nigeria, to Mrs. May, who in a way is less charismatic, although when you read her speech and you see what she said in her speech, there's a lot of substance there. Najima Animashaun, many thanks for joining us from London. Thank you.